The Orcs Empire had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. Their warriors were strong, their technology advanced, and their enemies always fell before them. Queen Selvash, the ruler of the empire, believed no species could ever challenge them. She sat on her golden throne inside the great palace of Clorva Prime. Her advisors stood before her, discussing the next planet to conquer. One of them, General Korak, mentioned a strange rumor. "My queen," he said, his voice uncertain. "Some of our soldiers speak of an old legend. They call it the human myth." Zelavash raised an eyebrow. "Humans," she repeated, almost amused. "That name has not been spoken in centuries." General Korak hesitated. "They say humans were the only race that ever fought us as equals. They say their warriors were unstoppable." The queen laughed, her sharp teeth glinting in the palace lights. "Fables and ghost stories. Nothing more." Another advisor, a scientist named Vector, shook his head. "The records show that humanity once existed. They fought fiercely but were destroyed long ago. There is no proof that any remain." The queen waved a hand. "Then why are we speaking of them? If they are gone, they are no threat." Korak cleared his throat. "The rumor started after our forces landed on Orcs 9. The resistance there fights differently. They strike from the shadows, destroy our supply lines, and vanish without a trace. Some believe." He stopped, choosing his words carefully. "Some believe a human leads them." Zelvash's amusement faded. She leaned forward, her glowing red eyes narrowing. "You are telling me that an extinct species has returned to challenge my empire." The general swallowed hard. "I do not believe it myself, my queen. But fear is spreading among the soldiers. They say this warrior fights like a demon, like the humans of legend." Silence filled the throne room. For the first time in her life, Selvash felt something strange, an unfamiliar sensation deep in her mind. Annoyance? No, something else. A flicker of doubt. She crushed it instantly. "Send more troops," she commanded. "Burn this resistance to the ground. And if this warrior exists, bring them to me." The general bowed and left quickly. The queen leaned back, watching the stars outside her grand window. Humans were myths, dead relics of the past. And yet, why did she feel uneasy? Orcs 9 was a small planet, rich in resources but weak in defense. For the Xorveni Empire, it was supposed to be an easy conquest. Their warships filled the sky, blocking out the sun. The alien soldiers, tall and armored, marched through the streets, destroying anything in their path. General Korak stood on a high platform, watching his army spread across the land. Smoke rose from burning buildings. The local resistance was weak, nothing more than desperate farmers and miners. Yet, something felt wrong. His second-in-command, Commander Jurak, approached him. "General, we have a problem." Korak frowned. "What kind of problem?" Jurak hesitated. "Our patrols are disappearing. At first, we thought it was an accident, but now it's happening too often. The soldiers vanish without a trace." The general's eyes narrowed. "How many?" "4 squads. Almost 50 soldiers." Korak clenched his fists. "An ambush." Jurak nodded. "Yes, but this is different. The enemy is fast. They strike in the dark and leave no survivors. Some of our soldiers reported seeing something, a shadow moving among them, taking them down one by one." Korak growled, "A coward hiding in the dark." Jurak shook his head. "No, General, this is not cowardice. This is a warrior who knows how to fight." The general turned to his troops. "Double the patrols. Hunt this enemy down and bring me their head." The Xorveni soldiers spread out, searching the ruined city. Hours passed. Then screams echoed in the distance. Korak and Jurak rushed toward the sound. When they arrived, they found only blood and broken weapons. No bodies, no survivors. A chill ran down Korak's spine. Then, from the shadows, a voice spoke. "You are not welcome here. It was a woman's voice, calm, cold, and full of confidence. Korak raised his blaster. "Show yourself, coward." A figure stepped into the light, a humanoid covered in battle-scarred armor. Her helmet was cracked, revealing sharp blue eyes that burned with fury. She held a long, blood-stained blade in one hand and a stolen Sorveni blaster in the other. Korak's blood turned to ice. A human. Impossible. "You," he whispered. The woman smirked. "What's wrong, General? You look like you've seen a ghost." Before Korak could react, she moved, faster than anything he had ever seen. Blaster fire filled the air, but she was already among them. Her blade flashed, cutting through armor like paper. Soldiers screamed, falling one by one. Korak barely managed to escape, running back toward his remaining troops. His heart pounded. This was no ordinary enemy. This was something else. A nightmare in human form. And she was just getting started. Orcs 9 was a small planet, rich in resources but weak in defense. For the Sorveni Empire, it was supposed to be an easy conquest. Their warships filled the sky, blocking out the sun. The alien soldiers, tall and armored, marched through the streets, destroying anything in their path. General Korak stood on a high platform, watching his army spread across the land. Smoke rose from burning buildings. The local resistance was weak, nothing more than desperate farmers and miners. Yet, something felt wrong. His second-in-command, Commander Jurak, approached him. "General, we have a problem." Korak frowned. "What kind of problem?" Jurak hesitated. "Our patrols are disappearing. At first, we thought it was an accident, but now it's happening too often. The soldiers vanish without a trace." The general's eyes narrowed. "How many?" "4 squads. Almost 50 soldiers." Korak clenched his fists. "An ambush." Jurak nodded. "Yes, but this is different. The enemy is fast. They strike in the dark and leave no survivors. Some of our soldiers reported seeing something, a shadow moving among them, taking them down one by one." Korak growled, "A coward hiding in the dark." Jurak shook his head. "No, General, this is not cowardice. This is a warrior who knows how to fight." The general turned to his troops. "Double the patrols. Hunt this enemy down and bring me their head." The Sorveni soldiers spread out, searching the ruined city. Hours passed. Then screams echoed in the distance. Korak and Jurak rushed toward the sound. When they arrived, they found only blood and broken weapons. No bodies, no survivors. A chill ran down Korak's spine. Then, from the shadows, a voice spoke. "You are not welcome here." It was a woman's voice, calm, cold, and full of confidence. Korak raised his blaster. "Show yourself, coward." A figure stepped into the light, a humanoid covered in battle-scarred armor. Her helmet was cracked, revealing sharp blue eyes that burned with fury. She held a long, blood-stained blade in one hand and a stolen Sorveni blaster in the other. Korak's blood turned to ice. "A human. Impossible." "You," he whispered. The woman smirked. "What's wrong, General? You look like you've seen a ghost." Before Korak could react, she moved, faster than anything he had ever seen. Blaster fire filled the air, but she was already among them. Her blade flashed, cutting through armor like paper. Soldiers screamed, falling one by one. Korak barely managed to escape, running back toward his remaining troops. His heart pounded. This was no ordinary enemy. This was something else. A nightmare in human form. And she was just getting started. Panic spread through the Sorveni ranks like wildfire. Their forces had crushed countless species, but this was different. This was something they didn't understand. General Korak sat inside his command post, his claws gripping the table. Reports came in every hour. Squads disappearing, supply lines destroyed, fear growing among the soldiers, and all because of one warrior. "She cannot be human," Korak muttered. Humans are extinct. Commander Jirak stood beside him, his face pale. Then what is she? No one had an answer. The fear grows. The Torveni had set up a large camp on the outskirts of the ruined city. Thousands of soldiers, heavy weapons, and shielded fortifications protected them. No enemy could break through. Or so they thought. That night, alarms blared through the camp. Explosions erupted from the armory, sending flames into the sky. Soldiers rushed to put out the fire, but then the real attack began. Gunfire echoed in the darkness. One by one, guards fell, their throats slit before they could even scream. The Xorveni fired wildly, but they saw nothing, only shadows moving faster than their eyes could follow. "She's here," someone shouted. The camp turned into chaos. The soldiers weren't fighting an army. They were fighting a ghost. Face to face. Korak and Jirak ran toward the command center, trying to regroup. But as they reached the entrance, a figure dropped from above, landing in front of them. Adrienne Voss. Her armor was scratched and bloodied, but she stood tall, holding a stolen Xorveni blade in one hand and a plasma pistol in the other. Jirak raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Adrienne moved. In one swift motion, she drove her blade through his chest. He gasped, eyes wide, then fell to the ground, lifeless. Korak took a step back, gripping his blaster tightly. His soldiers were always the hunters, but now, for the first time in his life, he felt like prey. Adrienne tilted her head. "You look scared, General." Korak growled, trying to hide his fear. What are you?" Adrienne smirked. "I'm human." She fired. Korak barely dodged the shot, diving behind a metal crate. He activated his communicator, screaming into it. "All units, kill her now." But there was no response, only silence. Korak's breathing grew heavy. He peeked over the crate and saw bodies everywhere. His elite soldiers, all dead, and Adrienne Voss was still standing. She wiped blood from her blade and looked at him. "Tell your queen." She stepped closer. "I'm coming for her." Korak scrambled to his feet and ran. For the first time in his life, he was fleeing from a battle. And he knew the legend of humanity was no myth. General Korak ran through the burning camp, his breath ragged, his mind in chaos. He had fought countless battles, crushed rebellions, and conquered entire planets. But never had he felt fear like this. Behind him, the screams of his soldiers filled the night. Plasma fires streaked through the air, but they were shooting at shadows. No matter how many times they tried, they couldn't hit her. Adrienne Voss was everywhere. She moved like death itself, silent, swift, and merciless. Every time the Xorveni regrouped, she struck again, tearing through them with terrifying precision. Korak reached the landing zone, where gunships waited. His hand shook as he activated his communicator. "This is General Korak. Emergency extraction. Now." The pilots responded instantly, engines roaring to life. A transport ship hovered above him, lowering its ramp. He ran toward it. And then she appeared. Adrienne Voss stepped out of the smoke, her armor reflecting the firelight. Her piercing blue eyes locked onto him. Korak froze. The last stand. The few remaining Xorveni soldiers stood between their general and the human warrior. They'd raised their weapons, forming a defensive line. Adrienne smirked. "You really think that's going to stop me?" Korak growled. "Kill her." The soldiers opened fire. Plasma bolts filled the air. But Adrienne was already moving. She ducked, rolled, and weaved through the chaos like a specter. Before they could adjust, she was among them. Her blade flashed. One soldier fell, then another, and another. The last Xorveni standing tried to run. She shot him in the back without hesitation. Korak stumbled backward, his mind screaming. He turned and sprinted up the ramp of the transport ship. The engines roared as the ramp began to close. He thought he was safe. Then a metallic clang echoed through the ship. Korak's blood turned to ice. He turned slowly, and there she was. Adrian Voss stood inside the ship, her pistol aimed at his head. No more running. Korek's claws twitched toward his weapon. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Don't. He froze. The transport ship rose higher into the sky, leaving the burning camp behind. Korek's mind raced. He had to do something. Anything. Before it was too late. You? His voice shook. You can't win. The Queen will. Adrian cut him off. Your queen is next. Korek's body trembled. This wasn't just a warrior. This was a force of nature. Adrian stepped forward, her voice calm, almost amused. For years, your kind thought humans were a myth, just stories told in the dark. She leaned in, her eyes burning with cold fury. Tell your queen. She pressed the gun to his head. The myth is real. The screen of her wrist device blinked. A signal sent. A moment later, the transport ship's door burst open. She leaped out, free-falling toward the battlefield below. And then, the ship exploded. The grand palace of Xorva Prime stood tall against the crimson skies, its golden spires reflecting the light of the twin suns. Inside, Queen Selvash sat on her massive throne, surrounded by her advisors and military leaders. The air was thick with tension. A transmission had just arrived. The holographic display flickered, showing the burning ruins of the Xorveni war camp on Oris 9. Bodies lay scattered, weapons destroyed. The mighty Xorveni forces, defeated by a single warrior. A warrior who was human. Queen Selvash narrowed her glowing red eyes. This is a trick, she said coldly. Humans do not exist. The room was silent. No one dared to speak. Then, another image flashed onto the screen. General Korek's last moments. His terrified face. The human standing before him. The explosion of the transport ship. The Queen's claws dug into the arms of her throne. Impossible. Fear in the Empire. Her advisors whispered among themselves. Some looked afraid. Others looked uncertain. My queen, said Vector, the chief scientist. We were always told that humans were wiped out long ago. But if this warrior is truly human, then perhaps. He hesitated. Zelvash glared at him. Perhaps what? Vector swallowed. Perhaps humanity was never truly gone. The queen stood up, her movements slow but dangerous. The room fell silent. She stepped forward, staring at the holographic image of Adrian Voss. This thing, this lone creature, do you all fear her? No one answered. Zelvash laughed, sharp, cruel, filled with arrogance. A single soldier, that is what has made you all weak. She shook her head. She is nothing. A ghost of a long-dead race. One warrior cannot stand against an empire. But she already has, Vector said softly. The queen's gaze snapped to him, and the scientist flinched. She stepped closer, her voice like ice. Do you doubt my power, Vector? The scientist trembled. And no, my queen. I only. Enough. She turned to her generals. I want this human dead. Double our forces on Oris 9. Burn the planet if you must. One of the warlords hesitated. My queen, what if she is not alone? Zelvash froze for a fraction of a second. The thought had already crossed her mind. For centuries, humanity had been a myth, a legend used to frighten young warriors. But if one had survived, could there be more? She clenched her fists. No, the Xorveni Empire was supreme. There was no force in the galaxy that could challenge her rule. She turned back to the image of Adrian Voss. You are nothing but a dying ember of a forgotten race, she whispered. But deep inside, for the first time in her life, Queen Selvash felt fear. Smoke still rose from the ruins of the Xorveni war camp on Oris 9. The once powerful army had been reduced to ashes. Their weapons, their war machines, all destroyed by one warrior. Adrian Voss stood on a rocky ledge, overlooking the battlefield. Her armor was scratched, her blade stained with alien blood, but her eyes remained cold and focused. She activated her communicator. Mission complete. The Exorveni forces are crippled. A voice crackled in her earpiece. Copy that, Voss. Any survivors? Adrian glanced at the wreckage below. The few Exorveni soldiers who had escaped had already flowed into the night, their fear stronger than their loyalty. None that matter, she replied. She shut off the communicator and exhaled. Step 1 was done. Now for step 2. The resistance rises. A few miles away, in an underground bunker, a group of resistance fighters waited anxiously. Humans, aliens, survivors of countless conquered worlds, all united by one goal: to destroy the Exorveni Empire. The entrance door hissed open. Adrian stepped inside. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to her. A burly alien, with thick reptilian skin and cybernetic arms, grinned. You actually did it. A human woman, scared but strong, shook her head in disbelief. You took down an entire battalion by yourself. Adrian smirked. Told you I would. The leader of the resistance, an old warrior named Darius Holt, stepped forward. He had once been a soldier of the Lost Terran Federation, before the Exorveni wiped it out. He looked at Adrian, his eyes filled with something between pride and sorrow. The Queen will send everything she has after you now. Adrian nodded. Let her come. Darius crossed his arms. This isn't just about you anymore, Voss. The Queen thought humanity was gone. But now she knows we still exist, and that changes everything. A murmur spread through the room. The Exorveni had ruled for centuries, believing themselves invincible. But now one warrior had shaken their empire. And if one human could do this, what could many do? Darius stepped onto a platform, raising his voice. For years, we've fought in the shadows, waiting for a moment to strike. That moment is now. The crowd erupted in cheers. Adrienne watched them, her grip tightening on her blade. She had spent years alone, hunting, surviving. But this was bigger than her now. This was war. The Queen's fury. Meanwhile, on Xorva Prime, Queen Selvash watched the reports from Oris 9. Her claws dug into her throne, rage burning in her chest. Send the fleet, she commanded. I want that human's head. Her warlords bowed. Yes, my queen. She leaned forward, eyes glowing with fury. You think you can challenge me, Adrian Voss, she whispered. I will show you what it means to defy a queen. And so, the hunt began. The Exorveni war fleet arrived above Oris 9 like a swarm of metal beasts. Dozens of massive warships hovered in the dark sky, their weapons glowing with energy. From above, the planet looked small, weak, ready to be crushed. Inside the lead warship, Queen Selvash stood at the command bridge, watching the surface below. This ends today, she said, her voice cold. Find the human. Burn everything if you must. Her generals bowed. Yes, my queen. The invasion began. A fight on two fronts. Deep underground, Adrian Voss and the resistance fighters gathered around a holographic display. Red markers showed the Exorveni ships spreading across the planet. Darius Holt clenched his jaw. They're coming in full force. We don't have the firepower to take them head-on. Adrian smirked. We don't need to. We just need to be smarter than them. She pointed at the hologram. They expect us to fight like an army. But we're not an army. We're ghosts. Darius nodded, understanding her plan. Hit them fast, hit them hard, then vanish. The resistance moved quickly. As the Exorveni troops landed, they found the city empty. Streets abandoned. No resistance in sight. But then, the attacks began. Explosions tore through their ranks. Buildings collapsed, crushing squads beneath rubble. Fighters appeared from the shadows, striking with deadly precision before disappearing again. It was not a battle. It was a massacre. And at the center of it all was Adrian Voss. She moved through the battlefield like a storm, cutting through armored soldiers, dodging plasma fire, striking with speed and fury. One human against an empire. The Queen's arrival. Selvash watched from her ship, her anger growing. Enough. She turned to her elite guards. Prepare my personal transport. I will kill this human myself. Minutes later, the queen descended onto the battlefield, her black armor gleaming under the flames of war. Her guards surrounded her, towering warriors armed with the deadliest weapons in the Empire. Then through the smoke, Adrienne Voss appeared. She stood alone, her blade dripping with Xorvani blood. The two warriors locked eyes. Selvash smirked. You have caused me much trouble, human. Adrienne twirled her blade. Good. I was starting to think you didn't care. The queen unsheathed her own weapon, a long, curved energy sword that hummed with deadly power. I will enjoy breaking you, Selvash whispered. Adrienne's smirk grew wider. You can try. The queen charged. Adrienne moved, and the final battle began. The battlefield was in flames. The resistance and the Xorvani forces clashed in brutal combat, but one fight mattered more than all the others: the duel between Adrienne Voss and Queen Selvash. Their blades clashed, sending sparks flying. Selvash was fast. Her energy soared, a blur of deadly light. But Adrienne was faster. She dodged, countered, and struck back with precision. The queen growled in frustration. You are strong, human, she admitted, but you are still alone. Adrienne smirked, wiping blood from her lip. Am I? Suddenly, explosions erupted across the battlefield. Resistance fighters overran the Xorvani positions. Warships in the sky began to fall, taken down by stolen anti-air weapons. The tide of battle had turned. Selvash's red eyes widened. No, this is impossible. Adrienne pointed her blade at the alien queen. You thought humans were just a story. You thought we were gone. She took a step closer. You were wrong. The queen roared in fury and lunged. Adrienne met her head-on. Their blades clashed again, but this time, Adrienne was winning. The final strike. Selvash swung wildly, but Adrienne dodged and slashed across the queen's leg. The alien leader stumbled, her strength fading. Adrienne didn't stop. She spun and plunged her blade into Selvash's chest. The queen gasped, her body trembling. You cannot win, she whispered. Adrienne leaned in close. I already have. With one final push, she twisted the blade. Selvash let out a strangled cry, then fell to the ground, motionless. The Xorvani queen was dead. Victory and a new future. Across the battlefield, the Xorvani soldiers froze. Their leader was gone. Their greatest warrior had fallen. Some tried to keep fighting, but many dropped their weapons and fled. Darius Holt's voice echoed over the resistance comms. The queen is down. The planet is ours. A cheer erupted from the fighters. Adrienne stood over Selvash's body, breathing heavily. She had done it. She had proven that humanity was not a myth. Darius ran to her, grinning. You actually did it. Adrienne smirked. Told you I would. The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. The Xorvani Empire had ruled for centuries. But now, with their queen dead and their forces in retreat, the galaxy would change forever. And at the heart of it all stood Adrienne Voss, the warrior who brought the legends of humanity back to life. Smoke still rose from the battlefield, the air thick with the scent of victory and ashes. The once mighty Xorvani Empire had fallen, its forces scattered, its queen slain. Adrienne Voss stood on the ruined steps of the Xorvani Command Center, gazing at the horizon. The twin suns of Orcs 9 were rising, casting golden light over the bodies of the fallen. Behind her, the resistance fighters gathered, their faces filled with exhaustion, but also hope. Darius Holt stepped beside her, his arms crossed. The Xorvani won't recover from this. Their entire empire is shaking. Adrienne smirked. Good. It's about time someone reminded them they're not invincible. Darius chuckled. And who better than the last human warrior? She turned to him, eyes glinting. Who said I'm the last? The truth revealed. The resistance fighters grew quiet as Adrienne stepped forward, her voice carrying across the field. For years, they told the galaxy that humanity was extinct, a forgotten race, wiped from history. But we were never gone. We were just waiting. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Many had fought alongside Adrienne, believing her to be the last human. But now they wondered. Darius frowned. Are you saying? Adrienne nodded. I've made contact with others. Survivors. Colonies in hiding. We were scattered, but we never died. And now that the Sorveni Empire is falling, it's time to return. The resistance fighters cheered, the sound echoing across the ruined city. The galaxy awakens. News of Queen Selvash's death spread like wildfire. Across the empire, Sorveni warlords turned on each other, fighting for power. Planets under Sorveni rule rebelled, inspired by Adrienne's victory. And then, the unthinkable happened. Human warships emerged from deep space. They had remained hidden for centuries, watching, waiting. But now, with the Sorveni weakened, they returned to claim their place in the galaxy. Adrienne stood on the bridge of a captured Sorveni warship, looking out at the stars. A fleet of human vessels hovered nearby, their sleek designs a stark contrast to the crude brutality of Sorveni ships. Darius stood beside her, shaking his head. You planned this all along, didn't you? Adrienne smirked. I had a feeling that Sorveni wouldn't be able to kill all of us. He laughed. And now? She turned, her blue eyes blazing with determination. Now we take back what's ours. The end, or the beginning. Across the galaxy, the legend of Adrienne Voss spread. Stories of a lone human warrior who defied an empire, who proved that humanity was still alive. Some called her a savior, others called her a monster. But one thing was certain. The age of the Sorveni was over, and the age of humanity had begun.